My name is Victoria Hayes. I'm 31, and 2 years ago, my stepmother Janet stole my father's $2.1 million inheritance by forging his will 3 days before he died. I watched her play the grieving widow at his funeral, while secretly transferring his assets into her name, cutting me out completely despite his promise that I would inherit his business and properties. "Your father changed his mind," she told me with fake tears. "He felt I needed security more than you did." What Janet didn't know was that I had hired a private investigator months earlier when I suspected something was wrong. Last week, I finally got the evidence I needed, proof that Janet isn't who she claims to be. Her real name is Jennifer Walsh, and she's wanted for fraud in 3 states. She also has a husband and 2 children living in Phoenix who think she died in a car accident 5 years ago. Yesterday, I sent this information to the police, the IRS, and her country club friends. This morning, I received a frantic call from Janet. "Victoria, please, we need to talk. I can explain everything." Too late, Janet. Or should I say Jennifer? Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. If you've ever had a step-parent try to steal what rightfully belonged to you, hit subscribe and stay with me. Sometimes the only way to get justice is to dig up the truth they thought they buried forever. I grew up as an only child with my father, Robert Hayes, in a beautiful home in Scottsdale, Arizona. My mother died when I was 8 years old, a car accident that left my father and me devastated, but somehow brought us closer together. For the next 10 years, it was just the 2 of us, and my father became not just my parent, but my best friend and business mentor. Dad owned Hayes Construction, a successful commercial building company he had built from the ground up over 20 years. He specialized in luxury resorts and high-end commercial properties throughout Arizona and Nevada. From the time I was 12, I spent summers at his job sites, learning about construction, project management, and business operations. "This will all be yours someday, Vicky," he would tell me as we walked through his latest projects. "I'm building this for you, so you'll never have to depend on anyone for security." Dad was old-fashioned about family legacy. He believed in passing down wealth and knowledge to the next generation, and he made it clear that Hayes Construction would be mine when he retired or passed away. We spent countless hours discussing business strategy, market trends, and his vision for expanding the company. When I turned 18, Dad officially made me a minority partner in the business and put me on the payroll as a project coordinator. I worked there part-time while attending Arizona State University, where I studied business and construction management. It was the perfect arrangement. I was learning the family business while getting a formal education that would help me run it more effectively. Everything changed when I was 22, and Dad met Janet Morrison at a charity fundraiser. She was 45 to his 52, an attractive blonde who claimed to be a widow from California. According to her story, her first husband had died of cancer, leaving her with a modest life insurance settlement that she was using to start fresh in Arizona. Janet seemed nice enough at first. She was charming, attentive to my father, and made appropriate efforts to include me in their early dates. Dad was smitten in a way I had never seen before. Not since my mother's death had he shown romantic interest in anyone. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he confided to me after they had been dating for 6 months. "Janet makes me feel young and hopeful about the future." I wanted to be happy for him, but something about Janet made me uncomfortable. She asked a lot of questions about the business, our family finances, and my father's retirement plans. When I mentioned my concerns to Dad, He dismissed them as natural protective instincts. "You're just not used to sharing me," he said gently. "Janet is good for me, honey. She's been through loss too, so she understands what it means to rebuild your life." They married 18 months after meeting in a small ceremony at their country club. I was Janet's only bridesmaid, and I genuinely tried to welcome her into our family. The early months of their marriage seemed harmonious enough. Janet redecorated the house, joined Dad's social circle, and appeared to be a loving, supportive wife. However, I began noticing changes in my father's behavior and business decisions. He became more secretive about company finances, started having meetings without me, and seemed increasingly isolated from his longtime friends and business associates. Janet also began asserting herself more aggressively in family matters. She suggested that Dad should gradually transition me out of the business so I could find my own path, rather than depending on family connections. She convinced him to remove me from certain company accounts and exclude me from important client meetings. "Your father thinks you'd be happier building your own career," Janet told me one day when I questioned why I wasn't included in a major project bid. "He doesn't want you to feel obligated to take over the family business if it's not what you really want." But it was what I wanted. Hayes Construction was my passion, my future, and my connection to my father's legacy. I had never expressed any doubt about my commitment to the business, so Janet's interpretation of my father's concerns seemed manipulative and self-serving. 2 years into their marriage, Dad began experiencing health problems. What started as fatigue and minor memory issues gradually escalated into something more serious. He was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease at age 55, a devastating blow that changed everything about our family dynamic. As Dad's condition worsened, Janet increasingly took control of his affairs. She convinced him to give her power of attorney to handle the business while he focused on his health. She began making unilateral decisions about company operations, often contradicting plans Dad and I had discussed for years. "I'm just trying to protect your father's interests," she would say whenever I questioned her decisions. "He's not thinking clearly anymore, and someone needs to make the hard choices." The most alarming change was how Janet began limiting my access to my father. She claimed that my visits were too stressful for him and that I should call before coming over. When I did visit, she hovered nearby, monitoring our conversations and often interrupting to redirect the discussion away from business matters. During one of my last coherent conversations with Dad, he seemed confused about recent business decisions. "I don't remember authorizing those changes," he said, looking at financial reports I had brought. "Janet said we discussed them, but I can't recall any of those conversations." That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I hired a private investigator to look into Janet's background, suspecting that her story about being a widow from California might not be entirely accurate. I also consulted with an elder law attorney about protecting Dad's assets from potential exploitation. The investigation took months, but what we discovered was shocking. Janet Morrison wasn't who she claimed to be. Her real name was Jennifer Walsh, and she had a husband and 2 children living in Phoenix who believed she had died in a car accident 5 years earlier. She had been using false identities to prey on wealthy widowers, marrying them, and then manipulating them into leaving her their assets. Before I could confront Janet with this information, Dad's condition deteriorated rapidly. He was hospitalized with pneumonia and never recovered. 3 days before he died, While he was heavily sedated and barely conscious, Janet somehow convinced him to sign a new will that left everything to her. I watched my father die, knowing that the woman holding his hand was a fraud who had stolen our family legacy. At his funeral, Janet played the grieving widow perfectly, accepting condolences from friends and business associates while I stood aside, knowing I had just lost everything that mattered to me. The reading of my father's will was held 1 week after his funeral in the law office of Miller and Associates, the firm that had handled our family's legal affairs for over a decade. I sat across from Janet, who was dressed in expensive black mourning attire, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue while the attorney read the document. To my beloved wife Janet, I leave my entire estate, including Hayes Construction, all real estate holdings, investment accounts, and personal property, the attorney read. I know she will use these assets wisely and care for our shared legacy. I felt the room spin as he continued. To my daughter Victoria, I leave my personal library and the contents of my office with the hope that she will understand my decision to provide security for my wife in her time of need. His personal library, after 23 years of promising me the family business, after years of training me to take over, after countless conversations about preserving our legacy, I was left with his books. There must be some mistake, I said, my voice barely audible. My father always said the business would be mine. The attorney looked uncomfortable. This will was signed 3 days ago, Ms. Hayes. Your father was quite clear about his intentions. Janet reached across the table to squeeze my hand, her touch making my skin crawl. Your father was worried about the business being too much responsibility for you, she said softly. He wanted you to be free to live your own life, not tied down by obligations. I pulled my hand away. That's not true. Dad and I discussed the succession plan hundreds of times. He was training me to take over. People change their minds, especially when they're facing mortality, Janet replied. Your father's final wishes were very clear. He wanted to ensure I was taken care of, and he trusted me to make good decisions about the business. After the will reading, I immediately contacted the attorney privately to ask about the circumstances of the document signing. He explained that Janet had brought Dad to the office during his final hospitalization, claiming he wanted to update his affairs before surgery. Your father seemed confused and weak, the attorney admitted. I did have concerns about his mental state, but Janet assured me he had discussed these changes with her extensively. She provided detailed explanations of his reasoning that he seemed to acknowledge. I knew this was wrong. Dad had been heavily sedated during his final days, barely conscious, and certainly not capable of making major legal decisions. But proving coercion or diminished capacity would be nearly impossible without witnesses or medical documentation. Over the next few weeks, Janet moved quickly to consolidate control of Dad's assets. She transferred the business into her name, closed his personal accounts, and began selling off properties. When I tried to collect my father's personal items from the house, she had changed the locks. I'm concerned about your emotional state, she told me through the door. Maybe you should take some time to process your grief before making any hasty decisions. I stood outside the house where I had grown up, looking at the woman who had stolen my inheritance, and felt a rage so pure it gave me perfect clarity. Janet had underestimated me. She thought I was just a grieving daughter who would accept her story and move on. She had no idea I had been investigating her for months. The private investigator's report had revealed Jennifer Walsh's true identity. But I needed more evidence to prove fraud and potentially reverse the will. I hired him to continue digging, this time focusing on her methods and any other victims she might have targeted. What we discovered was a pattern of sophisticated fraud spanning nearly a decade. Jennifer Walsh had used multiple false identities to marry and rob at least 3 other wealthy men. She would research her targets carefully, create elaborate backstories, and then gradually isolate them from family and friends while gaining control of their assets. Her method was brilliant in its simplicity. She would claim to be a widow herself, creating an emotional connection with men who had lost their wives. She would be charming and supportive during the courtship, then slowly introduce concerns about their adult children's motives once they were married. By the time her victims realized what was happening, she had legal control of their assets, and they were too embarrassed or incapacitated to fight back. The investigator also uncovered evidence that Jennifer was still married to her first husband, making her marriage to my father bigamous and therefore invalid. Her children in Phoenix still believed she had died in a car accident, and she had used her own death to disappear from that life and create a new identity. Most importantly, we found evidence that she had used similar forged documents to steal from her previous victims. She had a contact at a legal services company who would create authentic-looking wills and other documents for a fee. The will that disinherited me had been created using this same service. Armed with this evidence, I faced a choice. I could take everything to the police and watch Jennifer's house of cards collapse, potentially recovering some of my father's assets. Or I could use the information strategically to destroy the perfect life she had built on lies and theft. I chose the latter. Jennifer Walsh had taken everything from me: my inheritance, my family business, my father's legacy. Now I was going to take everything from her, piece by piece, until she had nothing left but the truth she had spent so long running from. Armed with the private investigator's evidence, I began planning Jennifer's downfall with the same methodical approach my father had taught me for managing construction projects. I would systematically expose each lie, destroy each relationship, and strip away every asset she had stolen. But I would do it slowly, so she would have time to understand exactly what was happening and why. Phase 1 was her social circle. Jennifer had worked hard to establish herself as a respected widow in Scottsdale's affluent community. She was active in the country club, served on charity boards, and had cultivated relationships with influential wives who had welcomed her into their social circle after my father's death. I started by anonymously sending information about her true identity to the charity organizations where she volunteered. The Phoenix Children's Hospital Board was the first to receive documentation showing that Jennifer Walsh was wanted for fraud in 3 states. They immediately suspended her from her position as fundraising chair. Next, I targeted her country club membership. I sent the club president a detailed dossier about Jennifer's criminal history, including arrest warrants and evidence of her bigamous marriage to my father. Within a week, she received a letter informing her that her membership was being revoked due to character concerns. I watched from a distance as Jennifer's perfect facade began to crack. She started receiving fewer invitations to social events. Her lunch dates with the other wealthy widows became less frequent. The respect and admiration she had worked so hard to cultivate began to evaporate as whispers about her true identity spread through their tight-knit community. Phase 2 was her finances. Using the evidence of fraud and bigamy, I filed a civil lawsuit challenging the validity of her marriage to my father and, by extension, her right to inherit his assets. While the legal process would take months, the lawsuit itself was a matter of public record that potential business partners and financial institutions could access. I also reported her to the IRS for tax fraud. Jennifer had been filing joint tax returns with my father while still legally married to her first husband, which constituted fraud. The IRS investigation would freeze her access to many of the accounts she had inherited. Additionally, I contacted Hayes Construction's major clients and business partners, not to badmouth Jennifer directly, but to express concerns about the company's future direction under her leadership. Several long-term contracts were canceled when clients learned about the ongoing legal disputes and questions about Jennifer's authority to run the business. Phase 3 was the most satisfying, exposing her lies to the people who trusted her most. I hired a second private investigator to locate Jennifer's first husband and children in Phoenix. Her husband, Michael Walsh, was a middle-class accountant who had spent 5 years believing his wife was dead. Her children, now teenagers, had grown up thinking their mother had died in a tragic accident. The investigator approached Michael carefully, explaining that his wife was alive and had been committing fraud using false identities. The shock and betrayal Michael felt was palpable when he learned the truth. His wife hadn't died in a car accident. She had abandoned her family to become a con artist who preyed on vulnerable widowers. With Michael's cooperation, we arranged for him and the children to confront Jennifer at her stolen house, my childhood home, on a Saturday afternoon when she was hosting a small gathering for her remaining friends. I positioned myself across the street with a camera, wanting to witness the moment when Jennifer's two worlds collided. At exactly 3 p.m., Michael Walsh and his 2 children walked up to the front door and rang the bell. When Jennifer answered, her face went white as if she had seen a ghost. In a way, she had. The family she had pretended to lose was standing on her doorstep, very much alive and very angry. "Hello, Jennifer," Michael said loudly enough for the guests inside to hear. "I think we need to talk about your death." The confrontation that followed was everything I had hoped for. Jennifer tried to deny her identity, but her children recognized her immediately, despite the changes in her appearance. The guests inside the house came to the door to see what was happening, and they witnessed Jennifer's breakdown as her carefully constructed lies collapsed in real time. "Mom, why did you leave us?" her 15-year-old daughter asked, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you let us think you were dead?" Jennifer had no answer. She couldn't explain abandoning her children, faking her own death, or stealing money from multiple men without admitting to being exactly the kind of person she had spent years pretending not to be. As the scene unfolded, I made sure to document everything. The video I captured would be crucial evidence in the legal proceedings. But more importantly, it was proof that Jennifer Walsh's perfect life was built on a foundation of lies that had finally crumbled. The aftermath was swift and brutal. By Monday morning, news of the confrontation had spread throughout Scottsdale's social circles. Jennifer's remaining friends and business associates distanced themselves from her immediately. The charity organizations she had been involved with issued statements condemning her actions and promising to review their screening procedures. More importantly, the evidence of her bigamous marriage and fraudulent identity gave me the legal grounds I needed to challenge her inheritance. The will she had forged was invalid because she had no legal right to be married to my father in the first place. Everything she had stolen was about to be returned to its rightful owner. But I wasn't finished yet. Jennifer Walsh had taken more than just money from me. She had stolen my father's final years, manipulated him during his illness, and denied me the chance to say goodbye properly. For that, she deserved to face the full consequences of her actions. The morning after Michael Walsh and his children confronted Jennifer at my childhood home, I received the phone call I had been waiting for. Jennifer's voice was shaky and desperate, a far cry from the confident, manipulative woman who had stolen my inheritance. "Victoria, please, we need to talk," she said, her usual composure completely gone. "I can explain everything. There are things you don't understand about the situation." "Actually, Jennifer," I replied, deliberately using her real name, "I understand everything perfectly. I understand that you're a career criminal who has been defrauding elderly men for years. I understand that you abandoned your children and faked your own death to avoid responsibility. And I understand that you forged my father's will to steal his assets." There was silence on the other end of the line before she whispered, "How long have you known?" "Long enough to gather all the evidence I needed to destroy your life," I replied, "the same way you destroyed mine." We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Scottsdale, where I had often met with my father to discuss business. I arrived early and chose a corner table where I could see the entire room. When Jennifer walked in, she looked like a different person from the polished, confident woman who had played the grieving widow at my father's funeral. Her hair was disheveled, her expensive clothes wrinkled, and she had the hollow look of someone who hadn't slept in days. She sat down across from me, her hands trembling, as she tried to maintain some semblance of dignity. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "I want my father's assets returned," I said simply. "All of them, the business, the properties, the investments, everything you stole." "It's not that simple," she replied. The legal process is already underway," I interrupted. "My attorney has filed motions to invalidate your marriage to my father based on your existing marriage to Michael Walsh. Since you were never legally married to my father, you have no claim to his estate." Jennifer's face crumpled. "You don't understand. I loved your father. What I felt for him was real, even if other things weren't." "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't you dare try to claim you loved him while you were manipulating him and stealing from him. If you had loved him, you would have told him the truth about who you were." "I wanted to," she said, tears starting to flow. But by the time I realized how much I cared about him, it was too late. I was trapped in the lies I had created. "You were trapped in a web of your own making," I corrected, "and now you're going to face the consequences." I pulled out a folder containing copies of all the evidence I had gathered. "I know about the other men you've defrauded. I know about the document forger you used to create false wills. I know about the bank accounts you opened using stolen identities. I know everything, Jennifer." She stared at the papers, her face getting paler with each page she turned. "What are you going to do with this?" "I've already done it," I said. "I've turned everything over to the FBI, the IRS, and the attorneys general in 3 states. You're going to be arrested for fraud, bigamy, identity theft, and forgery. You're going to lose everything you stole, and you're going to prison." Jennifer looked up at me with desperate eyes. "Please, Victoria, I know I've made mistakes, but I'm not a bad person. I was just trying to survive, to build a life for myself." "By destroying other people's lives," I replied. "By stealing from elderly men who trusted you. By abandoning your own children. You made your choices, and now you get to live with the consequences. She reached across the table as if to grab my hand, but I pulled away. What about your father's forgiveness? He was a good man who believed in second chances. Don't you think he would want you to show mercy? My father's forgiveness isn't yours to claim, I said coldly. You forfeited any right to his memory when you stole his legacy. And you forfeited any right to mercy when you chose to prey on vulnerable people. I stood to leave, but Jennifer grabbed my arm. Please, I'm begging you. I'll give everything back. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. You're right, I agreed. I'll never see you again, because you're going to be in federal prison for the next 15 years. 3 days later, Jennifer Walsh was arrested at my childhood home by federal agents. The charges included mail fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, bigamy, and elder abuse. The evidence I had provided was overwhelming, and she was denied bail due to her history of using false identities to flee prosecution. The arrest made headlines in the local news, with reporters describing her as a black widow who had preyed on wealthy widowers throughout the Southwest. The story included interviews with Michael Walsh and his children, who spoke about the devastation of believing their wife and mother was dead for 5 years. With Jennifer's marriage to my father declared invalid, the fraudulent will she had created was voided, and his assets were returned to his estate. As his only legitimate heir, I inherited everything: the business, the properties, the investments, and most importantly, the legacy that was rightfully mine. Hayes Construction had suffered during Jennifer's brief control, but with the legal issues resolved and the uncertainty removed, our clients began returning. I spent the next year rebuilding the company's reputation and expanding into new markets using the same principles my father had taught me. 6 months after Jennifer's arrest, I received a letter from her in federal prison. She claimed to have found religion and wanted to apologize for the pain she had caused. She asked if I would consider visiting her or writing back. I threw the letter away without reading it completely. Some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness, and some actions have consequences that can't be undone by apologies or claimed redemption. Jennifer Walsh was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to all her victims. Her children, who had been abandoned twice, first by her fake death and then by her arrest, were placed in counseling to deal with the trauma of learning their mother was a criminal who had voluntarily disappeared from their lives. Michael Walsh retained custody of his children and began the process of healing from the betrayal and manipulation he had endured. He later sent me a letter thanking me for exposing the truth and giving his family closure about what had really happened to their wife and mother. As for me, I found that revenge, while satisfying, was ultimately less fulfilling than I had expected. The real victory wasn't in destroying Jennifer's life. It was in reclaiming my father's legacy and building something positive from the rubble she had left behind. It's been 3 years since Jennifer Walsh was sentenced to federal prison, and my life has settled into a new normal that would have made my father proud. Hayes Construction has not only recovered from the chaos of her brief control, but has expanded into new markets throughout the Southwest. We're now one of the premier luxury commercial contractors in the region, with projects ranging from high-end resorts to corporate headquarters. The house where I grew up, the one Jennifer had stolen and changed the locks on, has been restored to reflect my father's memory rather than her false identity. I've converted his home office into a memorial space with photos from our construction projects, his awards and recognitions, and the business plans we had worked on together. It's a reminder of the legacy that was almost lost but ultimately survived. I've also established the Robert Hayes Foundation, which provides business mentorship and financial assistance to young entrepreneurs in the construction industry. It's my way of honoring my father's belief in passing knowledge and opportunity to the next generation, something Jennifer tried to steal but ultimately couldn't destroy. Michael Walsh and his children have rebuilt their lives with remarkable resilience. His kids are now in college, and he has remarried, this time to someone whose identity he thoroughly verified. He occasionally sends updates about their family, and I'm glad to know that something positive came out of the devastation Jennifer caused. Last month, I received another letter from Jennifer in prison. This one was different from her previous attempts at apology. Instead of claiming redemption or asking for forgiveness, she wrote about the other women she had hurt, the wives and daughters of the men she had defrauded. She included information about hidden assets and offshore accounts that could be used to provide restitution to victims who had never recovered their losses. I forwarded this information to the FBI and the attorneys handling the other cases. Whether Jennifer's cooperation was genuine remorse or simply an attempt to reduce her sentence, it helped other families recover money that had been stolen from them. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms. The experience of fighting for my inheritance taught me valuable lessons about resilience, justice, and the importance of never giving up when you know you're right. It also taught me that some people are capable of extraordinary deception, but the truth always has a way of surfacing if you're persistent enough to uncover it. I often think about what my father would say about everything that happened. He was a man who believed in fairness, hard work, and taking care of family. I think he would be proud that I fought to preserve his legacy and used it to build something positive. I also think he would be horrified to know how completely Jennifer had deceived him during his final years. But perhaps most importantly, I think he would be happy to know that Hayes Construction continues to thrive and that his belief in me as his successor was ultimately validated. The business knowledge he shared, the values he instilled, and the determination he modeled all played a role in my ability to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The private investigator I hired to expose Jennifer's crimes became a close friend and occasional business partner. He specializes in elder fraud cases now, helping families protect their vulnerable relatives from predators like Jennifer. We've worked together on several cases, and it's satisfying to know that our experience has helped prevent other families from suffering similar losses. I've also become an advocate for stricter laws regarding elder abuse and financial exploitation. I've testified before state legislative committees about the need for better protections for elderly people who might be targeted by con artists. While I can't undo what happened to my father, I can work to prevent it from happening to other families. One of the most unexpected outcomes of this experience has been personal growth. Before Jennifer's betrayal, I had been focused primarily on work and building the family business. The fight to reclaim my inheritance forced me to develop skills in investigation, legal strategy, and emotional resilience that I never knew I possessed. I also learned the value of patience and strategic thinking. My initial impulse was to confront Jennifer immediately with what I had discovered, but waiting and building a comprehensive case was ultimately much more effective. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is the kind that's methodical and complete, rather than impulsive and emotional. 3 years later, I'm in a relationship with someone who knew my father, and understands the importance of family legacy. We've talked about marriage and children, and I'm confident that any future family I build will be grounded in the same values my father taught me: honesty, hard work, and genuine care for others. When I think about Jennifer now, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel sorry for someone who was so desperate for security and status that she was willing to abandon her own children and destroy multiple families to get it. Her actions were unforgivable, but she's paying the price for them every day she spends in prison. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that family legacy isn't just about money or property. It's about values, memories, and the positive impact you have on others. Jennifer could steal my father's assets, but she couldn't steal his influence on my character or my determination to honor his memory through how I live my life. Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours? Have you encountered people who tried to take advantage of your family during vulnerable times? Share your experiences in the comments below. Remember that the truth has a way of surfacing eventually, even when it's buried under layers of deception. Sometimes the best revenge isn't immediate satisfaction. It's patient, methodical justice that ensures the right outcome ultimately prevails. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life accounts of overcoming betrayal and fighting for what's right. And remember, sometimes the people who seem most trustworthy are the ones you need to watch most carefully. As I wrap up this story, I want to share something that happened just last week that brought everything full circle in a way I never expected. I was working late at the Hayes construction office, reviewing bids for a new resort project in Sedona, when my assistant knocked on my door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "She says she's Jennifer Walsh's daughter." My heart stopped. I hadn't had any contact with Jennifer's children since that day 3 years ago when they confronted her at my childhood home. I knew they had been through counseling and were trying to rebuild their lives, but I never expected one of them to seek me out. Sarah Walsh, now 18 and a freshman at Arizona State University, stood in my office lobby looking nervous but determined. She had her mother's blonde hair but her father's kind eyes, and she carried herself with a maturity that spoke to the difficult experiences she had endured. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, her voice steady, despite her obvious nervousness, "I wanted to thank you for exposing my mother's crimes. I know it might sound strange, but learning the truth about what she did, as horrible as it was, finally gave my brother and me closure about why she abandoned us." I invited her to sit down and offered her something to drink. "How are you and your brother doing?" I asked. "We're okay," she replied. "It's been hard, but we're in therapy, and Dad has been amazing. He's remarried now to someone wonderful who actually cares about us as people, not as props in some fake life." She paused, then continued. "I wanted to ask you something. I'm studying business at ASU, and I'm particularly interested in construction and project management. I was wondering if Hayes Construction might have any internship opportunities." I was stunned. Jennifer's daughter wanted to work for the company her mother had tried to steal. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. "Are you sure you want to work here?" I asked gently. "Given the history between our families?" Sarah nodded firmly. "Because of the history between our families. My mother spent my entire childhood lying to me about who she was and what she was doing. She taught me that success meant taking from others rather than building something yourself. I want to learn what real success looks like, the kind your father built and you've continued." I studied her face carefully, looking for any sign of deception or hidden motives. But what I saw was genuine determination and a young woman who was trying to create her own path, separate from her mother's legacy of fraud and betrayal. "Your mother hurt a lot of people," I said carefully, "including your father and brother, and definitely including me. If you worked here, people would know who you are. They might not trust you immediately." "I understand," Sarah replied. "I'm willing to prove myself. I'm not asking for special treatment or forgiveness for what my mother did. I'm asking for the chance to show that I'm nothing like her." Something in her words reminded me of my own determination to prove myself worthy of my father's legacy. I made a decision that would have seemed impossible 3 years ago. I said, "We have a summer internship program for college students. If you're serious about this, you can apply like everyone else. You'll start at the bottom, learn the business from the ground up, and earn your place here through hard work and integrity." Sarah's face lit up with genuine joy. "Thank you, Ms. Hayes. I won't disappoint you." "Call me Victoria," I said, "and make sure you don't disappoint yourself. That's what really matters." That conversation changed something fundamental in how I viewed the aftermath of Jennifer's crimes. Her children were victims too, and they deserved the chance to build their own futures free from the shadow of their mother's actions. Sarah started her internship 2 weeks later. She worked harder than any intern I'd ever seen, arriving early, staying late, and asking thoughtful questions about every aspect of the business. She never mentioned her mother or asked for special consideration, and she handled the curious looks and whispered conversations with grace and professionalism. 3 months into her internship, Sarah approached me with a proposal. She had been researching sustainable construction materials and had developed a detailed plan for incorporating more environmentally friendly options into our projects. Her presentation was thorough, well-researched, and showed genuine innovation, exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach my father would have appreciated. "This is impressive work," I told her after reviewing her proposal. "You've identified market opportunities that could differentiate us from competitors while also reducing environmental impact." Sarah beamed with pride. "I've been thinking about what you said about earning my place here through hard work and integrity. I wanted to contribute something meaningful, not just fulfill the basic requirements of an internship." That's when I realized something important. Sarah Walsh wasn't trying to make up for her mother's crimes or seeking forgiveness for Jennifer's actions. She was simply trying to build her own legacy based on her own values and efforts. The fact that she was doing it at the company her mother had tried to steal was secondary to her genuine passion for the work. By the end of her internship, Sarah had earned the respect of our entire team. When she asked if she could continue working part-time during the school year, several of our project managers specifically requested that she be assigned to their teams. 6 months later, Sarah made another request that caught me completely off guard. She wanted to change her last name from Walsh to Martinez, her stepmother's maiden name. She explained that she didn't want to carry the name associated with her mother's crimes, but she also didn't want to take her father's name because she wanted to establish her own identity separate from both parents. "I want to be Sarah Martinez," she told me. "Someone who builds things rather than tears them down. Someone who earns success through hard work rather than stealing it from others." The name change was finalized on the same day that marked 3 years since Jennifer's arrest. Sarah, now Sarah Martinez, had transformed from the abandoned daughter of a con artist into a promising young businesswoman with her own vision for the future. Last month, she told me she was considering majoring in construction management with a minor in environmental science. She wants to specialize in sustainable building practices and eventually start her own consulting firm focused on green construction technologies. I want to build something that makes the world better, she told me, the opposite of what my mother did. I've offered to mentor her through her college years and beyond. Not because I feel obligated to help Jennifer's daughter, but because Sarah has proven herself to be exactly the kind of person my father would have wanted to support. Someone with integrity, vision, and the determination to create rather than destroy. The strangest part of this entire experience is that Jennifer's greatest crime, abandoning her children, may have inadvertently saved them from becoming like her. Sarah and her brother learned early that they couldn't depend on their mother's lies and manipulation. They had to develop their own moral compass, and they chose to build their lives on truth and hard work, rather than deception and theft. I often wonder what Jennifer would think if she knew that her daughter was working for the company she tried to steal, and that she was excelling based on the same values Jennifer had rejected. I suspect she would either be proud of Sarah's success or resentful that she had chosen a different path. But Jennifer's opinion doesn't matter anymore. She forfeited her right to influence her children's lives when she chose crime over family. Sarah and her brother are building their own futures now, free from the toxicity of their mother's choices. As for me, I've learned that the best revenge against someone who tries to steal your legacy isn't destroying their life. It's building something so strong and positive that their actions become irrelevant. Hayes Construction is more successful now than it ever was during my father's lifetime. The values he taught me have guided the company through crisis and growth, and they will continue to guide us into the future. Jennifer Walsh stole 2 years of my life and caused immeasurable pain to multiple families, but she also inadvertently taught me that I was stronger than I knew, more resourceful than I had imagined, and more capable of fighting for what was right than I had ever been tested to prove. The $2.1 million she stole was returned with interest. The family business she tried to destroy is thriving. The legacy she attempted to erase is stronger than ever. And the children she abandoned have grown into remarkable young adults who chose integrity over the path she had modeled for them. Sometimes justice isn't just about punishment, it's about restoration and redemption. Not for the person who committed the crimes, but for the people who were harmed by them. Jennifer Walsh will spend the next 12 years in prison, but the rest of us have moved forward to build something better from the rubble she left behind. That, I think, is the most complete revenge possible. Not destruction, but creation. Not tearing down, but building up. Not perpetuating cycles of harm, but breaking them and choosing something better. My father would be proud of the company we've built, the values we've maintained, and the young people like Sarah who are learning that success comes from integrity and hard work, rather than deception and theft. That legacy, the one Jennifer tried to steal but couldn't destroy, will outlast all of us and continue to make a positive impact long after the pain of her betrayal has faded into memory.